Welcome to Techzine.tv.
Welcome to a new episode of Techzine Talks. We're here still at HPE Aruba and we're talking to Zeus Kerravala. And we're going to talk about what's happening during Discover. And we're going to cover multiple topics. With me is also, of course, my famous co-host, Sander.
I thought we were going to call it Techzine TV, not Techzine Talks, but it's fine.
We have another show called Techzine.
Yeah.
We're doing Techzine TV
We
too.
do too many things.
We do too many things.
So we're actually bridging this gap because we have a sort of we need to bridge a gap before we can actually introduce you. So that the intro works well. But Zeus, thanks for joining us.
Oh, great to be here on Techzine Talk/TV.
Yeah. Well, whatever
TV it is.
Yeah.
As long as they talk about you, I don't care what you call us.
That's true.
But you're a principal analyst at ZK Research. What does it mean?
That's his name, I think.
Yeah, well, it is. But I've been an analyst now going on 25 years. I guess the first 10 or so, I was the head of research at Yankee Group, and then I went on my own. And I did that because I really felt like the industry was changing, and I wanted to be able to, kind of mix public media and research together, and that's kind of what I've done. But by and large, what I try and do is I study the market shifts that are happening and understand how that changes the whole vendor landscape.
Yeah. Well, it's part of what we do as well. So that's also nice to exchange ideas a little bit about what's happening. And so in general, when you look at HPE, apart from the logo change, which was a very smart.
I think it's a nice logo.
I don't mind the logo. I think it's quite nice.
They kept a piece of the frame, which is nice. So
Yeah.
it's a shout out to the end of the past, but a little bit more modern.
Yeah.
But I don't think that makes a big difference in the business world. But it is more modern.
That was it for today.
So apparently, some people think that does make a big difference.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have done it. I think.
Yeah.
A bit of a logo refresh never hurt anyone. But what are your thoughts in general about where HPE is at the moment? What's the what are the things that we all should look forward to and look?
I think they're probably in as good a place as I've seen them in a long time. And I think from my research perspective, it's my belief always that share changes happen where markets transition.
Mhm.
And so you look over the last few decades, we've had the rise of cloud, with the rise of virtualization, and things like that. And HPE did a great job in some of those markets. You can argue that maybe they kind of whiffed on the cloud a little bit, but I think they're not going to miss AI, right? And that's one thing that's been clearly talked about here, is their role in AI. They have their own version of AI factories, which of course everybody does, but I do think that is somewhat differentiated.
Yeah, every
Yeah.
hardware manufacturer that builds servers is offering a partnership with NVIDIA where they can offer all kinds of nice
Yeah, so
GPUs.
that's a challenge, right? Everybody's got their partnerships. NVIDIA, it's a little bit like, if you think back 20 years ago, the Intel Inside stamp drove a lot of sales.
Yeah.
Now it's the NVIDIA Inside stamp. But I think where HP has put a lot of work is at the software layer. They've got OpsRamp, they've got some other software, and they're trying to tie that to the NVIDIA software. So you can't run NVIDIA silicon without running the NVIDIA software, right? And so then you could argue that everything from the NVIDIA software layer down looks similar to every vendor, and then where you differentiate is above that, and that's where HP has put a lot of the work into it.
But not everyone is doing that.
But that's also
true.
That's also the place where you can actually differentiate, right? Because otherwise, you're just following the lead that NVIDIA gives you. I mean,
so there's two ways to differentiate. One's on price, right? And that's kind of that's always been the Dell go-to-market, is we just want to be a few shekels cheaper than the next guy.
Yeah.
Or it's on features and manageability. And for HPE, a big part of that is their OpsRamp platform, which brings a level of observability up and down the stack. And in fact, in some of the analyst pre-briefings, they were talking about the ability to look cross vendors, right? So an understanding that there's very few companies that are going to be all in on HPE everywhere, right? You're going to have multiple vendors in there, and they put a lot of focus in pulling in telemetry in from other vendors, and so they want to differentiate at that layer versus price. Right?
Also moving in Morpheus for automation.
Yes, yeah, that was the other part they talked about, was the ability to automate more of AI or of the IT operations function, and that's going to be interesting to see how that gets rolled out and how it gets adopted. I still think there's a lot of IT pros that are nervous about automation, but to me, it's like it's a tool, right? And so just like today, You wouldn't hire an accountant that doesn't know how to use Excel, even though back in that day, people thought, that kind of
I
automation was
wouldn't
bad for
hire an
you.
accountant that doesn't do automation, I
Yeah,
guess, because if he needs to book everything, you have to pay him by the hour. That's not the
and
best way forward, right?
but I do think eventually it will be, if you don't know how to use AI and automation tools as an IT pro, you're not going to have a job.
But the reason I asked is because you said, others are trying to compete on price, but isn't the TCO cheaper if you have more automation and a managed stack compared to doing everything by yourself?
Well, so now you're mixing uh, TCO and acquisition cost, right? And so I think there are some that like to live on with razor thin margins and
Mm-hmm.
compete on acquisition cost. Competing on TCO is harder because it takes more to prove, and there's more variables involved in that. And ultimately, if you've got a data center and you used to manage it with 10 people, and you can do it with 5 people, or you can just have it stop hiring people, right? Because it's funny because when we talk about like AI taking jobs, there's very few companies I talk to that have enough IT people, right? They're trying to hire, they're trying to have
Yeah.
more security people. So if you could just get by with the staff you have, that's a big win for a lot of companies, and that's where like Morpheus it does play a key role.
Yeah. So yeah, when it comes to networking, I mean, there's been a bit of a sort of developments recently around, especially around the smart switches. There's sort of a battle going on between HPE and Cisco. How do you see that?
Yeah, that's gonna be interesting to see how that develops. I do think it's interesting that it took so long for this whole concept of a smart switch,
Yeah,
right, to be developed. And I guess we just had to have a DPU that was a little more mature. Um, and although I could argue that if you go back maybe a decade, if somebody had rolled one out, nobody would have bought it. Could have been a bit of a solution looking for a problem.
yeah,
I think the problem today is the integration of security into the network, and most network vendors, Aruba and Cisco included, have tried to build security capabilities into their switches. But when you turned on too many of them, you would actually bring the switch to its knees. It just couldn't, it
yeah.
wasn't meant to do that kind of processing. And so by dropping the DPU into it, now you can, right? And so um, I think one of the comments that was made in one of the analyst sessions was that the concept of the internal firewall is going to go away, right? In fact, I believe that's long past its prime. There's no the internal firewalls are very expensive. They're hard to manage. They create a very messy environment, and so if I can protect lateral traffic movement by embedding the security into the switch, that's the best place for it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big use case is now, um, is now being able to bring security into the network. And in an AI world, right, where I'm bringing more and more data in, and that data becomes really the foundational component of faces of competition for my company, and I got to make
Yeah.
sure it's secured at the source.
We had a conversation about this last week. You guys both went to Cisco and to Aruba and talked a lot about the smart switching. But he was talking to me about it, so I googled it just to get a bit more reference. But if you Google a smart switch, you just get a layer 2, layer 3 switch. But that's totally different
Yes.
than the smart switches you guys are talking
I
about.
think
So
that
for the people that are
the naming is a bit unfortunate, I think.
yeah,
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 I think the brand was used before.
Yes. Usually, when people said smart switch, it was actually not a full blown switch. It was a sort of a less powerful switch, which you could sort of smartly manage from a
Yeah.
from an application or
In fact,
from
I
an
believe the
interface.
old Pro Curve half height switches were actually called smart switches back
but
in
for
the
the
day.
viewers out there, what's the new definition
So
of
the new
smart switch?
definition is a switch with DPUs integrated into them. So for either from Pensando or the Bluefield tree from NVIDIA. And what that is it's really just an offload engine. And so if you think of what a network switch does really well, it does by definition network things. It moves packets around, things like that. What it doesn't do well is encrypt traffic. It doesn't
Higher segmentation
yeah,
and all
yeah,
that stuff.
or even an
Yeah.
inspection of traffic.
Right.
It can do it, but that's like asking a CPU to process a lot of high performance graphics. And so just like a a computer needed a GPU to be able to do better graphics for video games, a switch needs a DPU to be able to do the packet processing required for security. And again, one could argue that, 5-6 years ago, maybe that wouldn't have caught on because we had all these separate security appliances. More and more organizations want to bring that functionality into the network because that's the point of ingress and egress.
It is a sign of collapsing your infrastructure, right?
Yeah, and that's something as an analyst, it's funny. I think I wrote my first report on that topic maybe 20 years ago or something like that. And it's taken a long time for us to get to this point. But I think it's a combination of historical fiefdoms and just it's a little bit of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And maybe we didn't really need it, and I could get by with having those groups and silos. But today you can't really get by because again, when you build out these AI environments, you're moving so much data around. And and there's been this big rise in ransomware and phishing and things like that. And so the bad guys are used in security. So you need to rethink how you deploy your infrastructure to be able to secure it at a much lower level than having an entirely parallel network that sits on top of your on top of your physical network. I agree. Yeah.
Did you also take a look at the new Alletra storage that has the new MCP server integrated for the AI models?
Yeah, that's part of their AI suite, right? And so, yeah, that's again, that's all fairly standardized infrastructure. And again, it's something at the software layer where they bring in a layer of intelligence. And so, I actually think we're going to see a complete refresh of everything from storage, compute, network, and I think if you think of those as the three legs of the AI stool, right? Compute, storage, and network, all of them have to work in lockstep in order to have AI work. And so you can't upgrade a piece of it. And I think what we've seen over the last 5 years, if you look at NVIDIA stock price, clearly there's been an overinvestment in GPUs and an underinvestment on the storage and networking side.
I'm curious how this is going to evolve because you have a storage server, you're adding an MCP server. That's nice, there is a direct connection, but there needs to be a software layer in between that filters out and helps the AI get the right data because the MCP server is just like handing over the data it has, but it isn't really the search engine behind it. So I'm wondering how that will evolve.
Yeah, I've talked to people about that, and I think you could almost use LLMs for that. You could use AI to make AI communicate with each other better.
Yeah.
Now, historically, in fact, I've been asking this question a lot because if you think of enterprise software, right? Like I can't get Slack to talk to Teams, right? So I've got 85 different messaging platforms on my computer. And so why do I believe this world of agentic AI is going to be any simpler for me to live in? Because I don't want if I'm running 100 applications, I don't want 100 agents talking to me, right? And so how do they communicate? Well, their MCP is a protocol, and A2A is very complementary. But I do think you can use AI to do the translation between the different variants of the agents that you're going to have. So you almost need AI to solve the AI problem, which is kind of a weird.
Yeah, but AI
Well,
can't
then
do
the
without
AI needs to be very
Yeah.
good, right? Otherwise, you're going to have problems. If the AI doesn't solve it well, then you end up with.
I actually think that's true up and down the stack, right? Like when you talk about networking for AI, I think you have to have AI for networking in order to do networking for AI, right?
Agree,
So you can make the same case for security. You have to have AI for security before you can do security for AI. And so AI almost begets more AI.
Yeah, what I found a bit odd this week is they don't talk directly a lot about VME. They do talk about it, but they don't take the appreciation that it got from the audience, I guess.
I think it's also because they're integrating it more and more in all the everything they do, right? I mean, and this week we've seen integrations in the GreenLake intelligence. It's integrated into AI Factory. It's all they're integrating it into everything. I think that's also the play that they're going for.
Yeah. So the question is it a product or a feature? Right? And so I do think they've tried to integrate that across everything. Just
then it is a feature, but I do think a lot of organizations are buying it as a product to replace VMware.
Yeah, and there's
and they're not taking the appreciation they get from it, I guess.
What could be interesting is if you combine VME with what you can do with these smart switches, which is also partly what NSX does. Not everything that NSX does, but sort of the big things in NSX. you can get actually very interesting alternative to the VMware environments that you probably want to get out of.
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity there.
Yeah.
I've talked to customers that Broadcom has come to them and told them their VMware pricing. Some told me like 1,200, 1,300%.
Yeah.
I've seen 300%, right? So you're going to pay more. Now, there's some organizations that are really locked into VMware from an operational perspective, and they're stuck, and Broadcom knows that, so they'll,
But
stick to
is it also that they're trying to get as many people as possible to VCF, and they don't want all those separate vSphere customers anyway?
No, that's true. So if you're a VMware customer, you must be all in on VCF.
Yeah.
And if you don't want the entire VCF stack, then go buy somebody else's.
Yeah.
And so Nutanix has taken a big chunk of that, and I do think there's an opportunity for another vendor. HPE's got a long history in compute, and
The difference with Nutanix is you're buying a whole platform also. And with HPE, you can just buy VME if you want. You can buy the whole GreenLake platform, of course, but you can also just buy the virtualization piece.
Yeah, and I think in a way, that's the Trojan horse, if you want to call it that, or if you think of land and expand, let's just migrate to VME, and then we can eventually move you to GreenLake.
As long as they don't go the same route as Broadcom does, right? So like we're gonna have to go all in, otherwise we'd rather get rid of you, right?
Well, that's never been HP's. I guess go-to-market's never been about locking a customer in, and frankly, if they were, their operating margins would be a little higher, right? Their revenue probably lower, but that's the broad. I mean, if there's one thing Broadcom knows how to do is make money, and they will do it at the expense of customers. I think HP has had the opposite approach, where they've sacrificed some margin a lot of times to do what's right for the customer. And so it's I can't fault Broadcom. Hock Tan knows how to make money. He is unwavering in his commitment to operating margin.
I was at
it's not the most customer friendly thing.
I was at Explore in Barcelona earlier or last year in November, and he was on stage. Hock Tan was on stage, and he said, "Well, we've had some complaints about pricing," and he literally said that on stage, and then the next sentence was, "We move on." And he doesn't care.
Yeah,
that's it's a strategy.
But if you look at the way HP has handled things over the years, it's they will sacrifice, their own margin to do what's best for the customer. Even if you look at the way they've handled a lot of the acquisitions, like on the networking side, they kept, ProCurve and Aruba and things like that around a long time, because sure, they could force a customer down one path or the other, but ultimately you're going to churn customers. You're going to have a lot of unhappy customers. So they almost take the tact of, we're going to do what's right for the customer as long as it takes. And then if it costs us a little more money on the R&D side, then so be it.
And to be fair, they also did some acquisitions that were, in retrospect, a little bit. Well, you can argue about them, simplicity, or some of the maybe also the what was the
Autonomy.
the autonomy, and then there was also this disaggregated kind of thing. Forgot the name, but where you could there was a layer on top of anything you already had, and you could composable stuff.
Yeah,
that didn't really land. I think they're moving towards more of an integrated kind of not lock in, but they are moving towards one.
Well, this is the ebbs and flows of IT, right? If you go all the way back to when I started my career, the mainframe was as locked in as you could get, right? Then we kind of opened up computing, went to PC computing. We had the software and hardware written by IBM, and then Microsoft and Intel came around, and everything became disaggregated, right? Then we moved to the world of cloud, and everything was turnkey, and then everybody wanted everything disaggregated. And now that we're moving into AI, nobody can put all the components together. And so now we're doing everything turnkey again. And I think within 5 years, as we get better at building the things, people will want things disaggregated. And, it just
keeps us in a job. And, and lots of other people as well.
So when technology are changing, right, and you're trying to do something new, you just don't have the best practices to be able to go grab a bunch of off-the-shelf components and put it together. Once it's a little more mature, you can, right? And then the market demands that, and you disaggregate.
And then, like you said, it's all the ebb and flows, right? Because once you go the component route, you say, well, we need a layer on top, otherwise this doesn't make sense. And then you come up with a layer on top, and they say, well, if we have a layer on top, why don't just consolidate into one thing, and then yes, it goes the same route again. Yeah.
But building AI systems is extremely difficult.
Yeah.
Right. Unless you're a hyperscaler, you're not going to be taking individual components and put it together yourself. So for the average enterprise, the cost of buying, in fact, I talked to one, the cost of buying a turnkey system was, I think, 2 or 3 times the price of trying to buy individual components. But from an overall TCO perspective, you asked about that earlier, it was like a fifth the cost, right? Just because you don't have to have all these specialty people around, and the deployment times are faster. And with AI, the ability to go to market that much quicker, it can get you ahead of your competition. And I was at an event about a month ago, and there was a speaker from Microsoft, and he said, "In AI, there are no fast followers, right? You jump on the bandwagon now, and you go forward with it, or you don't, because in IT historically, we were able to watch what our competition did, but AI moves so fast that this concept of fast followers is going to go away. And so again, if I buy a turnkey system, I can get up and running right away versus taking months and months and months to tweak and tune it. I'm going to be better off as a customer.
Can customers, are they, because I think so we're also at a sort of an inflection point from training to the inference, where inferencing is growing very quickly. And that's obviously something that a lot of customers are going to look into. I mean, that most customers are probably not really interested in training.
Yeah.
They're probably mostly in the inferencing thing. Do you see that there's sort of at an inflection point at the moment?
Yeah, that's been happening. I mean, there's only a handful of companies that can do training really well.
Yeah.
Right. And frankly, I'm not sure there's a lot of benefit to go. What are you going to get out of training off your data set that's relatively small compared to what you're going to get from a a Facebook or something like that. So
unless you're of the school that says, look, you want to be training your own smaller models.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's something that's really surging at the moment, at least in the media and
the smaller models are getting really, really good.
Yeah, that's
I actually think that's an interesting trend to watch, is the rise of small models, which are more purpose built for specific tasks.
They're more domain specific.
Yeah. And I liken it to the rise of search, right? So if you think of the early days of search, Google and Yahoo and those companies had good search engines, and we tried to apply that to corporate purposes. Those are pretty big, heavy models, search engines. But now, if you think about like Salesforce, there's a search box built into it. Every application you have has a search box built into it, but it's curated and built specifically for that purpose. And I think that's what we'll see with the rise of small models. Now, along with that, though, I don't have to buy these big Blackwell systems. I could probably do it using CPUs, right? Or maybe GPUs from competitive vendors. So it creates a more open ecosystem, and I think it creates a better competitive balance as well. But I do think the compute demands, the compute requirements change. They're not nearly as heavy as what I would require, with large language models, and therefore I don't need as much power, I don't need as much cooling.
And then also maybe if you're going down the sort of smaller route, you can also maybe don't also need the lock-in of the turnkey kind of stuff. Maybe because it's so small, you can actually run it in your existing environment somewhere you already have, and you don't have to invest in a completely new kind of environment.
That's probably some aspect of that. I'm sure AI PCs are for sale now. I'm sure there's some smaller models you'll be able to run on a computer if you want, like a laptop.
And I'm not sure if you're going to be very happy with it, but that's the.
It really depends. It depends on
but it depends on what you're doing.
With it, yeah.
But I don't need to apply an LLM to everything. That's the key.
Yeah. I spoke to someone who built an AI to write letters for doctors to send someone to the hospital stuff, and that's automated by AI. That can run on a laptop with a really small model, because it's basically the same text all over again. Only it needs some specifics that the AI can fill in.
Yeah, I think for pre-built translations, things like that. I mean, there's no reason to apply these big heavy models to them.
So, and finally, anything that HPE should do better at the moment? Where are they lacking?
Yeah, I think I still see they've done a better job of bringing the networking piece into the larger HPE umbrella. I still think that's a work in progress, though, and I do think the network, like I said, plays as important a role to the success of AI as storage and compute. And so, just seeing more of that come together. And I also think they could do more highlighting the security chops. They've got some great security tools now. right? The security switches we talked about, they had it, I think, 2 years before Cisco did.
21, 22, something
But
like that.
they've got some good use cases for that in security as well. But what I'd like to see out of somebody, and HPE is in a good position as anybody to do this, is to help us rethink what's possible, right? Like if you think about the early days of the internet, John Chambers would run around saying a bunch of crazy stuff like voice was going to be free, and and a lot of that stuff became true,
Yeah,
right?
I
But
wasn't an idiot.
it helped us rethink what it was. The internet wasn't about what we did before, a little bit cheaper and a little bit faster. AI is not about what we can do today a little bit faster. It's about completely rethinking the way we do things. And we don't really have a spokesperson for that today. Jensen could be, but he goes from like way up here to Blackwell in like 15 seconds, right? So I think that, given the size of the install base that HPE has and the portfolio they have, that would be an excellent role for them.
And you could argue, should NVIDIA take that role, right? Maybe not, because I think a lot of companies like HPE, but maybe some others as well, are better positioned to actually tell that story.
Yeah, no, and if you want to use, again, go back to the internet as an analogy, they're the Intel, right? They're the picks and shovels that make the stuff work. Somebody up the stack has to think about what's possible, and I think HP is in as good a position to do that as anybody.
And do you think that's going to pivot on GreenLake, around GreenLake? Is that going to be the...
Well, certainly GreenLake's the go forward. I think if there's one thing our industry needs is to simplify IT. And that's the whole promise of GreenLake.
Even though the growth of GreenLake, I haven't checked in the past year, but the growth of GreenLake wasn't extremely spectacular. It was a sort of moderate growth path. If it was such a good story, you would imagine.
Well, I think it's been tracking along IT replacement cycles. So as I switch off this old server, I might go to more of a GreenLake model. If we hit that inflection point where AI really starts to ramp, right? And understand, for all the media chatter that we have about AI, you still don't find a lot of enterprises having deployed on it, right? I think we're still in this phase of trying to ideate and figure out what's possible. Once that happens, though, then GreenLake becomes an important part of it, because it should scale up with it.
Basically, they've been priming for that for the past past years.
Yeah. That's why I think the world needs to understand what's possible in order to help us deploy that. And I think there's been very little discussion of that. It's really been about how I make my customer service a little better, how I make IT operations, troubleshoot a little faster, versus rethinking the things that we actually do.
Because rethinking is obviously the hardest thing to do.
But I also think GreenLake will be more attractive in the future when more automation, etc., comes in, because it also lowers the cost in managing the whole infrastructure.
Yeah, I could see buying an entire like GreenLake for healthcare, where you come in and completely take over the operations of the infrastructure that's used to drive electronic medical records or AI in healthcare, something like that, right? So it's going to play, it will play an important role in that once AI starts to scale. We're just not there yet.
All right. I think that's thanks for we wanted to do it 15 minutes. It's 28, so we're
I think we missed some, but it was a nice chat.
Well, we spent a little bit of time talking about TV versus magazine or something.
Talks and all that stuff.
Thank you for watching Techzine TV. We'll be back with
thank
more
you, Zeus,
videos
for
from HPE GreenLake. Thank you, Zeus, for joining us.
Happy to be on anytime I see you guys at the next show. So yeah.
Thank you, Ben, for setting us up.
Nobody sees Ben, but it's he's a good-looking guy.
He's better behind you, camera.
What I said about Ben.
Thank you for watching Techzine TV, the channel about enterprise technology that brings you IT insights and analyses from events all around the globe. We cover everything, everywhere. Visit techzine.eu for more written in-depth articles and analysis, or keep watching techzine.tv. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels and share your favorite videos with your colleagues. We'll see you soon.